is nice to have the guitar back.
Yay!
Of course, I'm extremely jealous. But we're going to work on some stuff in the fall. Anyway, back in 1975, I entered Montreal Diocesan Theological College. I think most of you probably know the story of how I got there. I wanted to be a priest since I was 8 years old, etc., etc., etc. Finally had met with Bishop Reginald Hollis, the diocesan bishop of the day, and he had given me all sorts of, there's this program, and that program, and that program, and this program. And having wanted to be a priest for so long, my response to him was, what's the quickest way? He was a brand new bishop. I probably wouldn't have gotten away with it a couple of years later. But since he was a brand new bishop, he said, well, that's a Bachelor of Theology program, and then a year of internship. And I said, that's it! I've been in school long enough. I just wanted to, get through and get ordained. So I entered the BTH program, Bachelor of Theology program. And in those days, when you were in the Bachelor of Theology program in association with McGill's Faculty of Religious Studies, your textbooks were shipped to the diocesan book room. Some of you may have been around here long enough, or are old enough to remember, before the office tower that we've got now, there was another building which was a joint Canadian Bible Study and diocesan book room building. And that's where we go to get our books. So, here comes September. Lorne's in the Bachelor of Theology program. I'm raring to go, ready to go. Can't wait to conjugate those Greek verbs. That was silly facetious, by the way. There's a story about me dropping out of Greek, but that's a story for another time. And so I went down to the diocesan book room to get my texts. And the thing that greeted me, what a terrible thing to say, the one who greeted me had the moniker, the nickname of Mary Bookroom. Do you remember her from those days, Mary Bookroom? Does that make sense to you? Yeah, Arctic is probably the most connected. Mary Bookroom was about my age, and I thought just absolutely stunningly gorgeous. And so I walked into the book room, and we're supposed to be thinking theological and holy thoughts, right? There's Mary, and Mary. I'm sure my mind edited the picture, as our minds do, but as far as I was concerned, Mary had gorgeous hair, she had gorgeous eyes, Mary's gorgeous. And I sort of went, whoa, I love studying. And so I had no idea how to get my textbooks, so I asked for a textbook, and she went and got the textbook from the back, where they've stored the textbooks with the various spots. Then I remembered I needed another textbook. And then another one, and then I had to come back a couple of times later in the week and into the next week and I was getting to know Mary in the book room. Later, I found out more about Mary. She'd been working at the book room for a long time. She was a faithful Christian, faithful member of St. Barnabas Church in St. Lambert, and there's stories that I could tell you about all that. She's a really sweet person, not only did she have nice hair, nice eyes, etc., but she's a really sweet person. And as I got to know her a little bit, it was really good. Another thing about Mary, she played guitar. And she played guitar much better than I played guitar. When I was a kid, I had 4 guitar lessons. The guy said you can never play guitar left-handed, so that was it for me in lessons. But Mary's really good. I was at the G, C, D, F, A minor, E minor type stage. But she could actually do stuff with the guitar. And she had a lovely Martin guitar, which made me jealous. Greg's listening to this part. Not that she'll just go on. Why are you laughing, Glenn? She had this lovely guitar, which she really knew how to play. Anyway, this one particular day, it was a Wednesday lunch hour, and in Diocesan College, when we were going through our training, Wednesday lunch hour was the college, I forget what we called it, it was basically a fellowship time. We would have a Eucharist service in the chapel. Various students would lead and read and all the rest of that sort of stuff, and usually there was a guest priest coming to dispense wisdom from the pulpit. And then we'd all have lunch together. Well, on this particular occasion, Mary Bookroom, whose name, by the way, was Mary Irwin, and it's now Mary Irwin Gibson. She's also the Dean of the Cathedral in Kingston, which tells you something. I'm not sure what, but it tells you something. She got promoted, I didn't. She was doing music. And so there she was, with the big blue eyes and the nice hair and the nice everything else, and the gorgeous Martin. Tells you where my priorities are, right? The gorgeous Martin guitar. And she started playing a song that I hadn't heard before. We're going back now a lot of years, 1975. That's more than a quarter century. And in 1975, songs like Freely, Freely, Seek Ye First, songs like that were new. They were emerging out of what was a renewal movement. It was called by many names the Charismatic Revival, the Charismatic Movement. One of the things that happened at that time in the church was the generation, and you see this always when there's a renewal movement, generation of a whole lot of new music. Some of it was absolute garbage, just absolute garbage. But it was new, so it was published. But some of the music was really, really good. And so on this particular occasion, Mary Bookroom, blue eyes, long, did I need to keep saying that? You just got the picture, right? But gorgeous guitar, I'm going to keep saying that, stood up in front of the chapel and started playing a song that I'd never heard before, called I Am the Bread of Life. And the way she played it, and I wish today I actually could play a guitar. And when I say this, I'm not making fun of her, okay? But I wish I could demonstrate it, and Greg's too good a guitarist to demonstrate it. She played it like this. I am the bread of life, he who comes to me shall not hunger, da, 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 da. Because Mary, she has a thing against dirges. You know, and one of her opinions back then, maybe still her opinion, is that Anglicans can kill any good tune. You know? Holy, holy, holy. How long can you drag out holiness, guys? You know, and so Mary had this thing, and I respect her for it, and it had a value. She had this thing about playing pieces up-tempo. And so she played virtually everything she played well, and she got the chords, but very up-tempo. And I remember sitting in Diocesan Theological College chapel as she was playing this, and thinking, that's wrong. That's wrong. It shouldn't be played like I am the bread of life. It shouldn't be bouncing. It should be more slower and with a more appreciative cadence. And as I later learned, because I bought the record, maybe you're old enough to remember records, vinyl. I bought it, and that is how it was originally done. It's done a fair bit slower, and as a meditation. And so, whenever we have the Sunday in the ecclesiastical calendar, where we have today's reading, I think of Mary's Bookroom, playing with the nice eyes and hair, gorgeous Martin, playing I Am the Bread of Life, and thinking, it needs to be much more meditative and contemplative. And that's what I'd like to do today. Not play it, but to think on it. Because today, that is the reading. Where Jesus stands in front of the people. And again, I'm not going to reread the gospel that I already read. I will remember it. But that's what he says. He says to the people, I am the bread of life. If you come to me, you'll never be hungry. And if you believe in me, you'll never thirst. I want to just talk about that for a little bit. I'm going to get into the bread of life thing a little while later. But the invitation there, if you come to me, you'll never be hungry. And obviously here, there's a metaphorical thing going on. Obviously he's not necessarily talking about physical hunger. And so I would like to ask the question, as we were asked it a lot of years ago at Diocesan College, what are you hungry for in your life? What's the empty, rumbling tummy of your soul? What's the part of you that needs to be filled? Where are you empty? And maybe dying of starvation would be just too dramatic. But where is there some unmet need in your life? And the question then, of course, is, in what way does Jesus want to respond to that? Of course, there are some unmet wants that we have that we confuse with needs. And that's a different sermon, just worth making as a side point here, that it's important not to confuse unmet wants with our true needs. But what are our needs? And then a corollary question that can come from that is, and where do those needs come from? Why are those unmet needs, why are those hungers present? And what I'd like to suggest, and this could go very, very long, but it's a sermon, it's not like a week-long course. What I'd like to suggest is often when we look at our needs, our hungers, often, not always, often, we see that they stem from our brokenness. As human beings, we were created by God to be in relationship with Him and His creation. This ties back to the sermon that I did a couple of weeks ago. To be in unity with Him and His creation. And that image in the Garden of Eden is of humanity with every need met. However we understand that story, that picture, the beauty of it in the book of Genesis, the garden in its perfection, everything vegetable that you need to eat is there. Earth, in the whole, the garden, earth, in its bounty, everything we need for our physical care is there. Some of the things that plague us, at least in that story, in that image, are not there. Disease isn't there. Not even death exists in the Garden of Eden because it's a place of perfection. It's a sinless place. So in the Garden of Eden, you don't need to worry about getting old and starting to break down like an old Ford. You don't have to worry that someday you could develop a disease that'll, cripple you. Not in the garden, because in the garden it's a place of perfection. And of course, the crowning glory of this, and if I didn't say this, some of you would really pick me up on it after the service, and rightly so. The crowning glory of the perfection of the garden is that we're walking hand in hand with God. There is no barrier to our relationship. There's no barrier in our relationship with God. There are no barriers to intimacy, to the perfection of intimacy, because there is no sin. So in the garden, that image, and again, I always say this, and I think it's worth saying, however you understand that image, you see perfection in terms of our bodily needs. There are no bodily needs. Our emotional needs. All our emotional needs are met and sustained by the perfection of God's order of creation. And our spiritual needs. We're there, walking hand in hand with God, talking face to face with God. And it would be marvelous. And as I was putting this sermon together this morning, I was just musing on this. Wouldn't it be just marvelous, just unbelievable, to have even just 15 seconds of God standing right next to me, where within that, and I don't like this word, but it's not like it goes, within that bubble, of God and me, side by side, nothing of the brokenness or fallenness of the order of creation or of my own humanity exists. That it's just pure relationship. And indeed, at that point, the trichotomy that I referred to before, the needs of the body, the needs of our emotions, and our heart, the needs of our spirit, in that degree of intimacy, that almost becomes a nonsense. Because to say the needs of the body, the needs of the emotions, and the needs of the spirit is a reflection of compartmentalization, of brokenness. That's the only reason those terms exist as such. In relationship with God, in that degree of intimacy, in that degree of perfection, it's all of a piece, and it's glorious. And so that's what was promised. And so when Jesus says, "I'm the bread of life, he who comes to me will not be hungry." I think I was actually going to forget that was where I was heading back to. If you come to me, you're not going to be hungry. That's really what he was referring to. He was referring to the restoration of relationship between us and our divine Creator when we come to a relationship with Jesus. Now, sadly, of course, this side of eternity, it will never be perfected. It won't be perfect. It will be glimpsed, and it will be experienced as a tickle of the spirit of the soul, however we wish to understand it. But it cannot be perfect, because we're broken. We're subject to decay and degeneration. We live on a broken planet. That is, well, I don't need to say much more than that. And our spirits, this side of being present with God, are broken as well. But he's saying something crucial and fundamental here. If you come to me, you won't be hungry. So he's speaking to the essential needs of the human spirit and saying, he's the answer. So, I'm the bread of life. You see why I would say that, with due respect to Mary, because she's marvelous, to play I am the bread of life as a bouncy song, it doesn't do it for me. Because it's something that we need to, can I use the word savor? Take our time with each and every word. I'm the bread of life. Who comes to me will never hunger. And then, who believes in me will never thirst. Without getting into the biological stuff, Bethany isn't here, which is good, because if I said something wrong in this part, she would correct me from a biological perspective. But I just understand that you can survive without food something like 30 days, maybe even more. But what is it, something like 3 days without water? So again, Jesus is hitting on something that is much more relevant to the culture that he's a part of than we're a part of, because we have no shortage of beverage in our culture. Man, we bottle water. Like, just think of that for a minute. Like, we have enough water that we could put it in little plastic bottles. It's kind of bizarre. Very unlike Jesus' culture. For them, water was life. And if you were going through a desert and you ran out of water, you were dead. You were dead. That was it. And an oasis was life. And Jesus is saying that if you believe in him, he becomes that oasis. He becomes the place of rest and refreshment and life itself. And the corollary that isn't said directly, but if you don't come to him, if you don't get that thirst satisfied, you're going to die of thirst. You will, one way or another. I remember hearing stories. I was wondering whether I should put this part in the sermon. I remember hearing stories about people who die of thirst in a life raft on the ocean. There's no fresh water. And so they start drinking the salt water because they're so desperate. And the salt, of course, causes dehydration. So the more you drink, the thirstier you get. Isn't that interesting? And that's worth musing on for a while. The more you drink, the thirstier you get. If you drink the wrong type of water, the more you think, the thirstier you get. So please just consider for a moment the world we're living in and the types of water that are offered and advertised as satisfying thirst. And so often they don't. Isn't it true that for many aspects, as it relates to advertising and other fields as well, the more you consume, the more you develop a need to consume. I used to be absolutely just gobsmacked going into super grocery stores in the States. I remember particularly once in a trip in a vacation in Texas, conference, wasn't a vacation, and going into a super grocery store in Texas. And I remember particularly the potato chip section. And it absolutely astonished me. I found it astonishing. I really didn't know how to react to it. It was unbelievable. I was brought up in Steinberg's and Metro and NDG, and I got to tell you, that were a far cry. Loblaws is now starting to approach it, right? But it was just absolutely astonishing to me. And then, and I don't want to pick on the States here, because it's not just the States, but so this unbelievable abundance, and people are eating themselves to death. You know? They're eating themselves to death. And isn't that what I was just saying about drinking the wrong type of water? If you drink the wrong type of water, you can die of thirst. You can eat yourself to death. The internet. And some of the things that people get up to on the internet that have now been determined to be addictive. And I don't want to pursue that too much, you know, because it could end up being the wrong focus. In terms of our addictions and our addictive behaviors, whatever those may be. What this is trying to satisfy a thirst, but in the wrong way. And when you try to satisfy the thirst with the wrong type of drink, you'll die of thirst. That's a reality. Now, Jesus doesn't say that in this particular thing, but it is implied and it is a corollary to it. I'm the bread of life. He comes to me, you know, and he who believes in me will never thirst. So obviously, what I would like to suggest here is that by coming into a relationship with Jesus and allowing him into one's life, that thirst gets satisfied. Perhaps not all at once. Perhaps we like to guzzle, and he wants us to sit for a while. But Jesus is the one who satisfies that thirst. So I'm the bread of life. He who comes to me isn't going to be hungry. I'll meet all your needs. And he believes in me will not thirst. The last thing that I've got to do before moving on from this section is to talk about the word believe. Because believe, and I've said this before, but it is worth repeating. Believe is a word that is often used, but much less often thought about, and I would suggest still less often understood. Words have definitions. And one of the things, Claire, you may remember this from your days at Marie Will, you weren't in the youth group, but nonetheless, one of the things we do at youth group, sometimes we'll be having a discussion about something and I'll ask people for a definition of something. And they'll use one word to define another. And I'll say, no, you can't use a word to define another. Words have different meanings. So if I was to say, define believe for me, and you were to say, well, let's have faith. Well, no, it isn't. Belief and faith are two different words, and they mean something different. Define belief. You have to use sentences, or we'll even let you use a paragraph to define the word believe. But believe is one of those words, or belief is one of those words where when you start to think about it, you go, well, how do I articulate this? Very often we find out that we have an inability to articulate it. What is the definition of the word believe? And if we have an inability to articulate a definition of the word believe, then that asks the question, do we do it? Do we believe? When we say, I believe in God the Father, creator of heaven and earth, as we recite the creed, what are we truly saying? So please allow this from me to be a functional definition of the word believe. To believe is to behave in a certain way based on your experience. To believe is to behave in a certain way based on your experience. If you have no experience of God, you cannot believe in God. You may hope there's a God. You may wish there's a God. You may have an emotional sympathy towards the notion of a God. You may very nobly pray that there's a God. But to believe is to behave in a certain way based on your personal experience. I can only believe in things that I've experienced. And if I may bore some of you who have heard this before, I once had a Ford that I did not believe in. I had wanted that Ford, I had thirsted and hungered after that Ford. See, I had to put something lovely humorous in this. I really wanted this Ford. Actually, it was a Mercury. It was a Capri RS. And anything that has RS, that's Rally Sport, right? It had an engine, it had a big engine, it had a 4-barrel carburetor. This was Positrack. I gotta stop talking about the car. It had everything I had always wanted in a hot sports car. And I got it. I got it. I was in a position financially where I could actually afford the blessed or cursed thing. And so I did something that my daddy had warned me about. He was a Chrysler man. I bought a Ford. And as far as my automotive experience goes, I have few, not very many, worse experiences than I did with my Ford. It got to the point where when I would sit down in the driver's seat, I wouldn't truly pray that it would start. But I got to tell you, every time I stuck that key in, I really wondered whether that car would start. I really, really wondered whether that car would start. I did not believe in that car. I would not lend it to friends because I was nervous about it. Contrast that, eventually I became a Mazda man. And sure, uniform. Became a Mazda man. The reason I became a Mazda man was Mazda was really cheap in those days. And I'm sure many of you will remember the Mazda 323. That was a great car. And I also became a Toyota man. In fact, the first new car other than the Capri that I got was a Toyota Tercel. And that thing was so reliable. It only had an AM radio, nothing extra. But that thing, I finally killed my Tercel pulling out tree stumps in my spoosh from my backyard. Okay? Fried clutch. And then I gave it to the neighbor who cut the roof off and gave it to his son who ran it around for a while. I believed in Mazdas and Tercels and Toyotas because every time I stuck that key in, no matter whether it was hot, cold, rainy, sun, no matter what, that car started. I believed in it. So, belief, behave in a certain way based on your experience. And trust stems from belief, by the way. Trust doesn't precede belief. Trust evolves from belief. So that's an operative definition. So what Jesus says is, I am the bread of life. You come to me will not hunger. If you believe in me, you're not going to thirst. So believe in me. In other words, behave in a certain way based on your experience of him. In order to believe in Jesus, in order to reap the benefits, in order to have that hunger satisfied and that thirst sated, you need to be in a relationship with Jesus. It's as simple as that. So Jesus says all these things, and I am watching my time, but this is really only part A of the sermon, frankly. He says all these things, and not unlike when Jesus is doing this type of teaching, he gets in trouble with the religious people. Because what he does is he equates what he says with something that every Jewish hearer of that particular preaching or teaching would understand from their cultural memory. He says, your ancestors all ate manna in the wilderness. They had a hunger for them. They ate manna in the wilderness, but they died. You know what I'm talking about, you're not going to die. And no wonder the religious leaders were upset. Because the manna in the desert, where did it come from? It came from God. It's a gift from God. The people didn't grow anything to make the bread. They didn't use their efforts, their labors, their skills. It was nothing to do with them that caused that manna to appear. It was a gift from heaven. They woke up one morning, and there it was. Wouldn't we love it if all our needs were met in the same way? Can you imagine if you woke up tomorrow and all your needs were met? Like, what a mind blower. They were afraid of dying of starvation in the desert. That's pretty big. But imagine, all of us, imagine, and again, as I was putting the sermon together, guess what I was thinking? Imagine if tomorrow I woke up, got out of bed, and actually got out of bed and walked to the bathroom, and didn't even have to think about it. Imagine if you woke up tomorrow and that arthritis was giving you grief, and no more migraines, and the relationships in your life were whole and healthy and mutually sustaining. Just imagine if you woke up tomorrow and all your needs were taken care of. In effect, that's what's being said. These people were dying of starvation, and they woke up one morning. There was the answer to the problem, the gift from heaven. And what Jesus says is, I'm that gift. I'm that gift. I'm one who appeared one morning, and I make it all right again. He is calling himself the defining gift of God that gives light and health for now and for eternity. He's saying, when you come into relationship with me, you're moving back to the garden. Welcome home. You're moving back to the garden. Of course, as I've said once, I'll say again, this side of eternity, with the limitations that all of us are forced to live with, it's not going to be perfected, this side of eternity, but it will be experienced. Come into a relationship with Jesus, the bread of life, you experience your hungers, being satisfied. Come into a relationship with Jesus, the water of life, you will experience your thirst, being sated. It is a promise of Jesus. It is a teaching of His. And it is a gift of eternity offered by God to you. And now let's pray. God, we thank you for all the promises that Jesus gives, not just the ones we hear of today. Thank you as well for people who have shown us the way, who have taught us, who have been examples to us of your grace and your goodness. And thank you for the offer of your gift. The gift of having our hungers met and our thirst sated. And as we thank you, we also acknowledge the reality that for all of us, we sometimes, maybe sometimes frequently, try to get our hungers met in the wrong places by the wrong things. That we allow ourselves to be seduced by what really turns out to be empty, hollow offers. So we acknowledge that and pray that you would give us the discerning spirits we need to recognize when that's happening. We pray for the world around us in its brokenness. We pray for victims of oppression and tyranny. Pray for the hungry. Pray for the dying. Father, raise up your church. Raise us up to be examples of the truths we profess to believe as Christians. In Jesus' name, we offer these prayers. Amen.
Amen.